You're watching Healing Words, brought to you by the Center for Humanities in Medicine here at Mayo Clinic. I'm your host, Jackie Fletcher. As one of the founding faculty members of the Creative Writing at the Bedside program at Mayo in Rochester, I've seen firsthand how writing can comfort, inspire, and help the healing process. I hope that you'll put writing in your toolbox of strategies to use while you're here and after you leave. You can always just sit back and watch the show today, but I hope you'll participate because you'll be given several writing prompts throughout the show so you can explore writing for yourself. You can use your own notebook or ask your nurse to contact the Center for Humanities in Medicine, and our staff will bring you one. Now today I'll be exploring the connection between writing and health with a woman who is deeply immersed in all the current research and best practices that really help to create a healthy body, mind, and spirit. Pilar Gerasimo is the founding editor of Experience Life, an award-winning whole life health and fitness magazine that reaches nearly 3 million people nationwide. She's also the author of Being Healthy is a Revolutionary Act, a manifesto for thriving in a mixed-up world. This essay was so popular that it inspired the website revolutionaryact.com and her Huffington Post blog. Pilar is also a nationally known speaker and workshop leader on topics related to healthy, happy, authentic living, and her thoughts from the editor column that she writes for Experience Life magazine is filled with wisdom that her readers, including me, have come to rely on. So Pilar, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much, Jackie. I'm really happy to be here with you.
So you have done a lot of workshops around the country, and you have worked with people from time to time who have experienced some kind of a trauma or an illness. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is, hospitalization, convalescence in a place like Mayo Clinic really gives you some downtime. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how that can present an opportunity.
Sure. Well, I think most of us in our normal, regular lives are so busy and so driven and so occupied with our relationships and our obligations, we tend to just proceed with a status quo. When we encounter an injury or an illness or any kind of trauma in our life, there is a kind of forced stop, or at least a forced pause, and it creates a context in which we can reflect on our lives up until that moment, and it gives us an opportunity, whether we like it or not, to think about how we want to move forward from here. It's effectively a pause, and it's the kind of pause that we often don't choose to take unless provoked.
That is the truth, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it's a situation where you're not feeling your best, and you have to have downtime, and yeah, I absolutely love that. So why not use it for something?
Absolutely.
There's a professor at the University of Texas, psychologist. His name is James Pennebaker, and he wrote a book called Writing to Heal. And I wanted to read a little quote from him, from his book. Since the mid-1980s, an increasing number of studies have focused on the value of expressive writing as a way to bring about healing. The evidence is mounting that the act of writing about traumatic experience for as little as 15 to 20 minutes a day for 3 or 4 days, so that's not very much, can produce measurable changes in physical and mental health.
Wow.
And he goes on to say that emotional writing can also affect people's sleep habits, their work efficiency, and how they connect with others. That's pretty powerful. And so I would love to have you talk a little bit about, writing can be such an incredible resource for emotional healing. And so how do you get started even doing this in the first place?
Yeah, well, I would love to first say I love research like that because it really is supported by all the neurological research that shows how reducing stress and kind of rerouting our synaptic networks can help change the physiology, the biochemistry in our bodies. A lot of the stress research has been focused on this in the past few years. In terms of how to take advantage of it, I think one thing is, allowing yourself to be in response to your experience and rather than in reaction. When we get hurt or we find ourselves sick suddenly, we often go into an immediate grief and shock and, anger reaction. And often we miss then the opportunity to notice, like, what's really going on with me. When we are provoked or prompted to move into a reflective process that includes expression, I think it automatically puts us into a kind of learner mindset or a growth mindset where we are more open to recasting whatever's happened to us in a different light. We can process through some of the negative, so-called negative emotions, and often get to a place where we're asking interesting questions about what now or what next. I really love that we can express it through writing as well as through talking and sharing with the loved ones that we have. Because the other thing is that sometimes it's a profoundly personal experience. We may be, have a sense of loss of identity if it's a severe injury or a very severe illness. We may be facing also our own mortality or the anxiety of how our life might change. And I think sometimes it's easier to process that on your own before trying to take it into a conversation with other people.
I think that's true, and the research bears that up as well, because, one of the things that Penny Baker found in later research was that it was kind of a 3-step process. It was writing about the specific details of the event. Mm-hmm. It was then writing about the emotional part of that event, how it made you feel. Yeah. And then the third piece of that in his research he found was that the people who really did well afterward was if they made some kind of an aha connection.
Yes.
From the whole experience, and they couldn't just write about the physical details. They couldn't just write about the emotion. They had to do the whole thing.
That's a great insight.
Isn't that really interesting?
Yes.
In the magazine, in Experience Life magazine, you guys do a column called How I Did It, success stories, mm-hmm. and some of those stories are about people who've been through either a trauma, an accident, or an illness of some kind. Mm-hmm. I recall reading one about a breast cancer survivor, and would love to hear over time, because you've now been editing this magazine for over 10 years.
Yeah, almost 12 now.
Almost 12, wow. And I would love to hear, over time, have you noticed some commonalities in those stories mm-hmm. that you would like to share?
Yes. Well, one is that initially almost everyone feels a sense of frustration and loss. And I think it's sort of like the grieving process. People go through the denial and anger and bargaining. And that plays out as people tell their stories. One of the things that I've noticed, though, is that almost always in these stories, there's an experience that people have in relation to their body. I used to be able to do this with my body, and now I can't. And how do I deal with that? How do I redefine myself, rethink my goals, my ambitions? How do I grieve the loss of my former life and maybe my former relationship with, obligations that I had that I no longer can fulfill? Once they've moved through that, they start to see that there are other opportunities that open up. And it sounds a little cliche. It's that whole thing of like one door closes, another door opens, and no one really wants to hear that when they're suffering. But somehow when people write their own stories, that part of the story comes through in the narrative. I began to understand that, or I had this experience and it showed me that, or I woke up one morning and I realized there was a gift in it that I hadn't anticipated. I would certainly never propose that it's going to feel like a gift to anybody who's had a loss of ability or vitality in their body. But oftentimes what people discover is that they have capacities they didn't know that they had. There are strengths in their relationship in their community that they didn't recognize. And they have gifts that they're able to give and want to give, and they grow, and growth ends up being very satisfying on some level to them.
And it's not just the patient who grows, right? I mean, because it's also the people around the patient. So it's the caregivers, it's the family members, it's the spouse, it's the loved ones.
Yes.
And that kind of leads me to this question I wanted to ask you, because your father was in a really bad accident. He was hit by a drunk driver in 2006, and he's still suffering some of the effects of that accident.
Yeah.
And you wrote about that in some of your columns in the magazine, a couple of them. And so I would love to have you talk to the patients, talk today about how writing about that experience specifically helped you through it as a caregiver.
That's a great question, Jackie. I think whenever illness and injury or difficult things happen, they always happen to more than one person. There's no way for something to affect one of us and not affect the network of people around us. I think initially my sisters, I have two sisters, and I were both really compelled to take care of my dad. And we were really worried about my dad and getting him through the initial trauma of his injury, recovery from surgery. It absorbed every bit of attention we had. And then there was a period in the hospital where we were by his bedside. We were with him almost 24 hours a day. And there were periods where we had forced downtime. He was sleeping. No one wanted to disturb him. It was between care that he was being given. And I started writing, and my sister started writing in a journal. And we kept the journal in his room and sort of talked about what was going on with him and his physical and mental and emotional condition, kind of journaling and chronicling our experience as sometimes feeling like we were helpless, you know, in the situation, and other times talking about the small victories that we felt. You know, he had a progress point, or someone was really sweet who came into the room and treated him really kindly. And I think reflecting on those experiences as they were chronicled in the journal, it inspired me to start writing on my own about how this was affecting me and my own reflections on my relationship with my father, for example, my own sense of vulnerability, you know, at having nearly lost him at a time that we weren't planning on that, you know. It's very confronting dealing with that kind of dramatic experience, but it is a trigger for exploration, and I'm really glad I captured those thoughts now. Looking back on them, it's like it really comes back to me with an immediacy, emotionally and almost viscerally, how scared I was. And it reminds me of our vulnerability, all of us, that we have on a day-to-day basis.
How in the world did you think to have a journal in the room that everybody would write in?
You know, I think because I've journaled my whole life, you know, off and on at least, and my sisters both have journaled, and we had a kind of obsessive need to take care of the situation and sort of keep track of stuff. There's so much that goes on in a hospital room, particularly in ICU. You want to make sure you're not missing anything, you know, and I think it started as a kind of log of, you know, medication and this and that, and it very quickly turned into something much more. So it's something I would encourage almost anyone to do, whether you're the patient, the so-called patient, or, you know, one of many versions of participants in the experience around that person.
Oh, that's wonderful. I absolutely love that, and plan to take that into my own life. Thank you very much. That was
Sure.
wonderful. Writing is something that we all do alone, except in the case where you were all writing together. But it's, you know, then when you wrote about it in these columns for the magazine, you connect with other people.
Yes.
You know, so then it becomes another powerful way to connect with others in a deep and meaningful way. And I would love to hear what kind of feedback you got from readers, you know, if you got support, or how that whole experience was for you. Did it help connect you to other people actually writing about it?
It did, it did. It was so touching. I mean, there really was, you know, you read about this so-called outpouring of support and emotion, and it really did feel like that. It felt like an embrace from people I'd never met, you know, all of whom had enormous empathy, many of whom had similar experiences. You know, this happened to my mom or my son, or I lost someone. And people, what surprised me was the sense of gratitude that people expressed, that I had taken time to share it and that I shared my authentic emotion about it and my vulnerability. It surprised me in a way because, like you said, I think the writing that we do often feels very contained in a little bubble. And it was one of the first times I felt like I had written something that was truly from my heart, not as an editor's letter, not as, you know, a smart person about something, you know, writing about some expertise that I had. It was a very honest sharing of an experience that happened intimately in my family. And when people responded to it, I realized my family was bigger than I thought.
Oh, that's great. That is great. And that's what we all need at some level, don't you think?
I do.
It actually reminds me of something, too, that the writing itself showed you something, because I was working here with a patient at Mayo Clinic, and she said to me at the end of the session, "The writing showed me the way." And I just have always remembered that, because it was such a powerful statement that the writing itself and I don't know what it was, but she did, and that was the important thing. And I would love to hear how you think writing can be something that can be transformative, it can be empowering, it can show you the way.
Yep. You know, one of the things Viktor Frankl said that I always remember is that, you know, I'll paraphrase, but we don't get to choose all of the experiences that happen to us, that are the last of human freedoms is to choose your response to what happens to you. I think the act of writing and immersing yourself in a writing experience in response to whatever has happened to you, it's an inherently creative act and a productive act. And I think in some cases, it's a domain that you do have some control over, you know, and you can rage, you can cry, you can blame, you can be as mad as you want to be about what happened. And as you write, in my own experience, your experience transforms itself, and you start realizing some things that you may not have. The other thing is, I think you touched on it before, is that in terms of just practically speaking, stress management, having something to do on a daily basis that is a physical act of writing. I really believe in writing, if you can, in a notebook or on a legal piece of paper or something. There's something about putting hand to paper that I think is biologically healthy for us, that it channels stress hormones, out right throughout the pen, basically. And then the final thing that I would say is, if you choose to write about your experience, the healing happens not just in the moment that you're writing, but as you go back and you begin to read what you've written. I think of that as kind of a showing the way experience. You begin to see there's an arc to what you're writing. You begin to connect to parts of yourself you weren't hearing before. And when you recognize yourself on the page in that moment, something transformative often happens, or something healing happens.
I completely agree, and I'm very glad that you said that, because some of the research that I read in your magazine was a little disturbing. And in particular, it is the research of Barbara Fredrickson,
Yes.
who is a big person in the positive psychology movement.
Yes.
And so you wrote an essay called Being Healthy is a Revolutionary Act, and this is what you wrote about her research. In terms of overall well-being and life satisfaction, recent psychological research by Barbara Fredrickson shows only about 20% of us are thriving.
Yeah.
The remaining 80% of us appear to be just getting by, or living lives of quiet despair. And that's right out of her research, quotes around that.
Yeah.
I was floored when I read that.
That is disturbing.
So, and now, as we talk to patients who are in, and caregivers and family members who are in a situation that can cause fear, it can cause confusion, it can, big emotions, and despair can be one of those. How can you use writing as a way to increase satisfaction? I mean, that seems like we're against some pretty big odds, so how can writing help in those, when you feel those kinds of emotions?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is that in the act of writing, you choose a relationship to your own suffering that's different. It's not purely passive anymore. And I think one of the things that Barbara Fredrickson's research really clearly demonstrates is that as you choose a learning or a growth mindset, as you choose to be open to discovering new things about yourself and your experience, and to being open to the idea that they can and will change, nothing is permanent. Bodies heal, relationships heal, lives change, sometimes dramatically and traumatically. But if writing gives you that opening to understand that something is shifting, you develop this mindset that is expansive and that's sort of a spiraling up, she calls it. And magical things happen there that you can't anticipate. The other option is to sink deeper and deeper into your despair and to go as deep and low as you need to go to kind of bounce back up. But when people are going through that experience and it feels like it's just tightening in on them, and things get dark and black and people get fear and depression kind of compressing and making worse whatever they're already experiencing, that's when hopelessness sets in. And so I think writing is a trigger, it's a catalyst for a change, a shift. It's a popping of that dark black balloon and a letting in of some new light. And not everything that you'll see is going to be beautiful, but acknowledging the reality of what is always a healthy thing. And then oftentimes we can find something to appreciate about it, even if it's acknowledging our own unhappiness and just saying, you know what, this is painful, and I'm in a suffering mode. What are my choices now?
So will you help our patients for a moment?
I would love to.
And caregivers and family members, whoever is in the room with us today. I would love it if you would give a writing prompt. Because we would, at the Center for Humanities in Medicine, we believe very strongly that writing is a healing strategy.
Yes.
So can you offer a writing prompt for us?
Sure. Well, one of my favorite writing exercises, and you can do it anywhere and any time, you can even do it verbally if you're not able to write at the moment, because sometimes that's a problem for people, is an ideal day visualization or meditation. It's part of the course I teach called Refine Your Life, or sometimes Change Your Life. And it's an experiment I did myself and found it really valuable. The basic idea is that you take a little quiet moment, take a few deep breaths, and just begin visualizing how you might spend an ideal day. This might be an ideal day in your current physical place, or it might be an ideal day in your best case scenario healed place. Many people find that really energizing. And you start from waking up in your bed or wherever you wake up in the morning, and really writing down the details of your day, how you would spend the first hour, the first half hour. What are the details, as you mentioned, of the space that you're in? How does it smell? What's the quality of the light? What's the experience of being in your body? Who's around? And you basically go through the day that way, noticing when you would want to take breaks, when you want to be active, when would you want to be indoors, outdoors, working, playing, and noticing the quality of life that really is calling you. Noting all those little details. It can be simple things, you know, like I'm in a beautiful red room. Maybe a red room is just really appealing to you. Nothing wrong with writing that down. What kinds of foods, who prepares them? You can get wild and big with this and make it a crazy fantasy, or you can kind of make it, you know, a version of designing the next phase of your life. Two really interesting things happen when you're doing this. One is that you make discoveries about longings and desires that you might not have known that you had. The other is that, you know, our minds don't really know the difference between reality and our imagination. And so as you're imagining your ideal day, your body often will respond with the right kinds of neurotransmitters and hormones, and, you know, there's a reduction in your stress hormones and a rising in your happy, rest, and relax hormones. And I think that actually physically opens up pathways to healing too. But at the end of it, you end up with this lovely essay about how you'd spend your day. And at the end, it's like, how would you end your day? How would you go to sleep? What are you excited about and looking forward to in the next moment? And I probably do this exercise 2 or 3 times a year, and I always get something out of it.
I'm going to go home and do that one this afternoon.
Good.
Pilar, thank you so much. This was just a wonderful conversation. I'm so pleased that you could join us today. I would love to have you read for us some of your work.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, thank you.
I'm going to share 2 pieces with you, both of which were originally published in my column in Experience Life magazine. Both are my reflections following my father's encounter with a drunk driver. The first is from 2006. On the evening of April 30th, my dad was on his way home from a family dinner when he was struck and gravely injured by a drunk driver. That driver was so drunk, in fact, that he walked away from the accident, leaving my father broken, bleeding, and trapped in his crushed vehicle without so much to checking to see if Dad was alive, which he was, miraculously, despite a massive impact, several shattered limbs, deep lacerations, and a collapsed lung that left him struggling to breathe. It was the kind of accident that could easily have killed any one of us, and so our family has counted a great many miracles and blessings since that night. The fact that there was some passing traffic on the normally quiet county highway and that witnesses immediately called 911. That an off-duty firefighter and EMT just happened to live nearby and was on the scene within minutes. That the police tackled the drunk driver in a field and pepper sprayed him into submission. That the Lifelink helicopter and Jaws of Life arrived quickly. That the trauma and orthopedic surgery teams at the hospital had all the skills and techniques they needed to piece Dad's body back together again, and so on. But perhaps the greatest miracle and blessing of all was that Dad's body could be pieced back together. When the doctors came out of the first emergency surgery to talk to us, they remarked admiringly and repeatedly on the unusually healthy state of his body. Dad had the bones, they said, of a much younger man, and it was clear from his fitness and his muscle tissue that he had been active his whole life. The orthopedic surgeon extolled the density of Dad's bones and noted how well they'd taken the pins and rods that might otherwise have shattered them further. The doc who sewed up Dad's head commented on the excellent quality of his skin. Our father's prognosis, they said, for surviving this and ensuing surgeries, for enduring his long recovery, and for eventually reclaiming his lost mobility, was far more promising than it normally would have been for a person his age, in large part because he was in such excellent and vibrant health before the accident occurred. For as long as any of us can remember, Dad has eaten exceptionally well and has exercised on a daily basis. Since having his hip replaced last year, his favorite fitness activity has involved pounding a giant tractor tire with a 10-pound sledgehammer. Just prior to the accident, he'd worked his way up to several hundred swings. Today, even though Dad is stuck still recuperating in his bed much of the time, it's not unusual for us to look over and find him doing his shoulder lifts, his ankle circles, his isometric glute squeezes, and whatever other exercises he can muster. We know he's counting the days until he can once again stand, walk on his own 2 feet. My dad's strong connection to his body and his will to repair it, though, have only been part of the healing equation. The other critical factors in his recovery have been his love of life itself, his deep well of intellectual and emotional resources, and perhaps most of all, his wonderfully resilient spirit. As we go to press, my father still has several months of difficult rehab ahead of him. In the meantime, he continues to be a fitness hero of mine and an inspiration for maintaining my own health and vitality as I age. While we may not welcome all the changes that age, injury, and illness bring us, most of us do value the wisdom that comes from that experience. And if there's one thing this particular experience has taught me, it's that a long-term, whole-person commitment to health and fitness is one of the most important priorities any of us can maintain. If you've already made that commitment to yourself and your loved ones, they'll thank you. And if you haven't made it yet, know that it's never too late to start or to start again. This second piece is an update to the first, written about 5 years later. It's an excerpt from a piece I wrote called Happy Endings. The other night I had dinner with my father, who is 81. Dad had been talking about how lucky he felt to have escaped 3 close brushes with death he'd had over the course of his lifetime to date, and he was relating the dramatic stories of each event. The first was in the 1940s, when he was a young steelworker building bridges in Gary, Indiana, and was nearly knocked from his 60-foot high perch while operating a heavy drill. In the 1960s, he and my mom survived a terrible head-on collision with a drunk driver while on a road trip with my newborn sister. Finally, just a few years ago, he was struck at high speed by another drunk driver on a rural highway near our family's farm. That last crash left a big impact on my father. He's walked with a limp ever since and has lost a lot of strength in his arms and hands. He still suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. Loud noises and fast-approaching vehicles startle him badly, and is also suffering from a combination of spatial and short-term memory loss that we suspect is at least partially due to his head injuries and trauma. That said, aside from those setbacks, my father remains active, mentally sharp, and physically fit. He still lives on his own. He works out 3 times a week with a trainer and is always up for walks and movies, as well as for lunches and dinners out. If anything, he seems happier to me now than ever, and he's only grown more grateful and loving over time. Dad often reflects on how much he's enjoying his life now and how much he appreciates his family and friends. He says he senses a thinning of the membrane between him and other people, all life really, and it makes him feel both more empathetic and more connected than he's ever felt to the world around him. As we were talking over dinner, an interesting thing happened. We'd moved on from our close calls conversation to other lighter topics, but at one point I was just sitting there smiling at my father. Dad looked at me, smiled back, and said with great compassion, "You're thinking about death just now, aren't you, sweetheart?" I was startled by his comment, but I had to admit that he was right. What I was thinking, actually, was how happy I was to still have my dad here with us, and my mom, who has long struggled with the secondary effects of Lyme disease, and my sisters, and so many other people and creatures dear to me. I was also thinking, frankly, of how lucky I am to be here myself. My existence, after all, is the direct result of my parents having survived those various close calls, many of which preceded my birth. And naturally, I've had my own fair share of near misses too. Probably all of us have, whether we realize it or not. In the rush and muddle of our daily lives, though, we sometimes neglect to appreciate how much of our present reality hinges on the course of events that could have turned out very differently. We may also fail to appreciate just how precious each year, each moment, each relationship, and each interaction really is. As the current year draws to a close, I think it is a great time to express our appreciation for what is, for all that has been, and for the happiness available to us in each passing yet present moment.
An article in Pilar's magazine called A Real Pleasure explored research on how important it is to boost your levels of vitamin P. Never heard of it? Well, vitamin P stands for the amount of pleasure you have in your life. According to the story, even small doses of pleasure can raise immune-boosting chemicals in your body, as well as feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Pleasure and satisfaction triggering experiences also help reduce and offset the pro-inflammatory effects of stress hormones, such as cortisol, which plays a significant role in many chronic health conditions, as we heard when Pilar talked about her prompt for us. For the next writing assignment, I'm going to twist Pennebaker's research here just a little bit. Instead of writing about a traumatic event, I'd like you to write about a pleasurable one. You might write about the day you met your sweetheart or had your first child, a moment on a beach somewhere, a day you felt extremely proud of an accomplishment, a wonderful day you had with a loved one. I want you to really explore a good memory with your pen in hand, as Pilar also told us earlier, and about what happened that day. Who was there? What were you wearing? Again, specific details are the building blocks of writing. If you walked into a building in your memory, how many steps were there to the front door? Were they concrete, wood? Were they stone? Were they brand new, or were they worn by millions of feet? Once you've described the experience, explore your feelings about it. Why was this memory so wonderful? What did the event make you feel? Did this moment change anything in your life? Is there anything you learned that day that you can apply to your life now? One trick that many writers use is to set a timer for 10 or 20 minutes. During that time, the goal is to never, ever let your pen stop moving. Even if you're writing the same phrase over and over and over again, eventually your thoughts will get unstuck. I hope you'll give this a try. By writing about a pleasurable moment in your life, your body will relive those emotions, and even in the middle of your stay here at Mayo Clinic, I hope you can find some time to take a dose of vitamin P. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Jackie Fletcher. I hope you've been inspired by just how powerful writing can be. You can reach me with any thoughts or suggestions, or arrange to have a writer visit you in your room through the Center for Humanities by using the contact information on the screen. Until next time, be well.